Good morning. Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss the issue of women's representation in legislative bodies. This module will help you to understand the need to integrate women into legislative bodies and also to understand the challenges that women face in this field. In post-independent India, one of the most important debates has been the issue of representation of various sections of population of India in legislative bodies. And in this, one of the most important debate has been women's representation in legislative bodies. As you know, modern democracy is rooted in the idea of separation of powers given by Montesquieu. Separation of powers between legislature, executive and judiciary. You must also be knowing that legislature is that branch of the government which makes the law. Executive is the branch that enforces the law made by the legislature. Judiciary interprets the law made by the legislature and the executive. As the highest law-making body, the parliament at the center and the assemblies at the state level determine the direction in which democracy ought to proceed. It is through the laws made by these legislative bodies that the status of various sections of society is decided. It is through the legislative bodies that an inclusive polity could be established, sustained and preserved in a democracy. Since representatives are the ones who run the democracy through the government, it becomes very important as to who or what do the representatives represent. It is necessary for the legislative bodies to reflect diverse voices of citizens, the mainstream as well as the margins. In other words, representation of all sections of society is essential for a successful democracy. It is against this background that we are discussing representation of women in legislative bodies. As per data compiled by Inter-Parliamentarian Union in 2016, Rwanda tops the list of having 63.8% women in its lower house. Bolivia is ranked second with 53.1% in its lower house. Belgium has most women in its upper house with 30 out of 60 seats going to female representatives, while Zimbabwe is ranked second with 47.5%. As per data made available by the United Nations, there are wide variations in the average percentages of women in legislative bodies in each region across the chambers. In 2015, countries of Nordic region such as Norway, Sweden and Finland had 41.1%, while the rest of Europe, excluding the Nordic region, had 24.4%. The Americas, both the North and the South, had 25.5% representation of women in legislative bodies, while Sub-Saharan Africa region accounted for 23%, followed by the Asian region that had 18.4%. Middle East and North Africa had 17.1%, while the Pacific region had the lowest representation of women in the legislatures with 15.7%. The global average for women in parliament stands at 22%. In India, women's representation of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha does not paint a very bright picture. As per the data compiled by Inter-Parliamentary Union, India is ranked at 141 with 12% both in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Yet the percentage is better than what has been seen in the past. It is also better than what finds in the state legislative assemblies. The national average of representation of women in state legislative bodies stands at 9%. Bihar, Rajasthan and Haryana fare comparatively better with 14% representation, while Pondicherry and Nagaland have no women in state legislature at all. When contrasted with the SAARC countries, India occupies 5th position with Bhutan, Maldives and Sri Lanka following our country. Nepal tops the list with 29.5%, followed by Afghanistan with 27.7% and Pakistan with 20% and Bangladesh again with 20%. India does not fare well even in comparison to 5 BRICS countries, where it occupies 4th rank with only Brazil to follow with 9% representation. At the level of the Asian region, countries like Saudi Arabia fare better than India. This is surprising given the fact that women's lack of freedom at the societal level in Saudi Arab has been a hot theme within the feminist debates. Before we turn our attention to the reasons of women's lack of better representation in legislative bodies in most countries in general and in India in particular, let us try to understand the arguments in favor of women's representation. First, women's representation is important for furtherance of human rights conditions. A real democracy is one where all sections of population get the opportunity to present their demands. If democracy is to be made vibrant and just, then women have to be incorporated at different levels. This fact was realized way back in 1952 at the United Nations Convention on Political Rights of Women. This has been reiterated in the World Plan of Action in Mexico 1975, Copenhagen Plan of Action of 1980, World Conference on the UN Decade of Women in Nairobi 1985 and the World Congress of Women in Beijing 1995. Second, women's representation is needed to change the existing rules of game in politics. Politics in most countries is seen as a dirty arena of corruption and muscle power. This is largely due to the predominance of what are considered as masculine values such as competition and confrontation, as well as winning and losing. Women have the potential to bring about changes by promoting values of cooperation and collaboration and compromise. After all, in their daily lives, these are the values that women practice to keep families and societies intact. Women's inclusion into parliamentary framework can also bring in important skills, attributes and perspectives into the process of governance. Third, since parliament is the most important decision making structure in the democratic state, women's inclusion has the potential to pose serious challenge to the societal subordination of women in various manifestations. A critical mass of women parliamentarians can lead a gender insensitive society to a gender sensitive one. While it is often quoted both by women and men parliamentarians that gender equity is very essential for the progress of a society, very few actually take steps towards that. One case in point is the Women's Reservation Bill in Indian Parliament that has been repeatedly shelved since 1996, despite demands from women's networks that it has strong potential to facilitate empowering conditions for women. Traditionally, politics has been a male-dominated arena all over the world. Women entering into the political arena have to face many individual and social antagonisms. Such antagonisms often present a host of gender-related, economic and political challenges that women have to overcome in order to succeed. Let us now turn our attention to discuss the challenges to representation of women in legislative bodies. First, let us discuss gender-related challenges. Though most democratic constitutions have pledged to act as agents to bring about changes in traditional mindsets, the nature of citizenship in most developing countries remains clearly gendered. In these countries, women's citizenship identity is mediated by their social identities such as their wifehood, their motherhood. They are expected to perform their social duties even if it may lead to avoidance of their citizenship duties. It is taken in most societies that women are the repository of family dignity, community honor. Such notions act as barriers in facilitating women's participation in politics, which might imply traveling and interacting with men. Making women bound to the private sphere often leads to lower their level of confidence when suddenly exposed to public sphere. A parliamentarian, as the member of the highest decision making structure in a democratic setup, ought to exude confidence. Most societies that tie their women to private sphere end up in having low confident women who cannot be expected to be confident politicians. This is what has been found in most panchayats where women's reservation has been reduced to what is called proxy women leaders. Now let us turn our attention to economic challenges that women face in this field. Women's access to legislative bodies is dependent upon the availability of economic resources with them. Elections in democracies are by no means inexpensive affairs. Given the fact that most women in Asia and Africa are excluded from access and control over land, technology and credit. It is almost impossible for them to mobilize enough resources even to contest a local election. According to UNDP, women constitute 70% of the world's poor. Women's poverty is a direct consequence of that they are being paid less for their labor compared to men, have few resources at their disposal and are less likely to be in a position to utilize available resources in their own favor. When combined with illiteracy, such lack of access to economic resources has the potential to block women's entry into political domain. Now let us turn our attention to political challenges. Majority countries across the globe have granted women the two most fundamental democratic rights of voting and contesting elections. Theoretically, such initiatives have placed women in equal pedestal with men within societies, making them politically independent. However, reality in most countries present a very different picture. In most countries, women's rights to vote are restricted by their families and communities who decide whether they should be sent to exercise their fundamental right to vote or not. Now, we will attempt to understand the major political hurdles that keep women away from parliamentary politics. First, Indian political arena, like most countries across the globe, is dominated not only by men but also by masculine values and masculine models. Masculine values and models imply towards the fact that it is men who write the rules of the game right from the beginning and then decide the standards of evaluation. Masculine values such as winners and losers and competition and confrontation are considered as the rules of politics. It is so very different from the values of collaboration and consensus that society wants women to inculcate right from their childhood. Therefore, it is only very natural that women find political arena as very uncomfortable. Similarly, electoral work schedules, travelling for campaigns, meetings, visiting constituencies may often clash with their nurturing role within families. Recently, a Brazilian member of parliament drew a lot of comic attention on social media when she decided to breastfeed her hungry infant while participating in a political debate. For most women, it is the choice between either family life or political life, while for men, women of their households become supportive agents to run the family in a stable manner. Most political parties are not very receptive to women contestants. They do need women members to present a gender-friendly image of the party. Women are also seen campaigning and mobilizing other women for electoral gains of respective parties. But when it comes to choosing candidature for contesting elections, not many female candidates are given the opportunity. Logic of winnability is what decides who should be given tickets. Winnability in turn is determined by financial resources and muscle power available with the candidates. As Sushma Swaraj, now our Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, has said, it is very difficult for a woman to make up her mind to enter into politics. Once she makes up her mind, then she has to prepare her husband and her children and her family. Once she overcomes all these obstacles and then applies for ticket, then the male aspirants against whom she is applying make up all sorts of stories about her, and after all this, when her name goes to the party buses, they do not select her name because they fear losing that seat. What also works against most women candidates is their lack of networking support. While men are encouraged right from their childhood to go outside and maintain friendships that goes on to facilitate their understanding of potential benefits of networking, women are encouraged to develop nurturing and serving people. As a consequence, most women do not consider networking as beneficial for career and professional growth of self. Even if they want to network, most women lack resources to invest in such contacts. The Constitution, the 73rd and 74th Amendment Act to Indian Constitution in 93 has heralded a new age in India with reservation of 33% of seats at the local bodies such as panchayats and the municipalities. The main aims of amendments were to integrate women into decision making process at the local level. At another level, it was also an experiment to see the implications of gender quotas on women's status and social empowerment. Prior to reservation, the arena was considered as belonging to men. A woman got space only if an influential male family member wanted her to contest. By the 15th anniversary of reservation in 2008, however, women's participation had made headway. It was reported that in 2008, today more than 26 lakh representatives stand elected to the 3 levels of panchayats. Of these, over 10 lakh are women. Encouraged by the results of 33% reservation of women in local bodies, the Constitution 108th Amendment Bill 2008, popularly known as the Women's Reservation Bill, was introduced in the Parliament. The chief aim of the bill is to empower women politically through reservations in Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabhas of each state in India. However, even after 8 years of its introduction, the bill has not succeeded to become an act. What is the way forward? It has often been discussed that the liberalization policy in India has been favorable towards participation of women in Indian political arena. Opening of Indian economy has resulted in the emergence of private media houses and competition among them, which though unintentionally have been agents for creating awareness among women for their political as well as electoral rights. Based on this, many women's networks and groups started lobbying for gender quotas within Parliament and state legislative bodies. At the outset, we must argue in favor of female literacy, but then we must not stop there. We must proceed towards achieving female education. While female literacy points towards how many women have been going to the educational institutions, label of female education indicate independence of minds of women. Female education could contribute to more women making independent choices about the kind of profession they would like to be into. This again could go a long way into facilitating women's choices to be people's political representatives in the legislative bodies. However, increasing the quality and quantity of women in legislative bodies would require changes beyond mere policies. It must begin with changing the traditional societal mindset that ties women into the private sphere of by making them repository of family, dignity and community honor. In this context, civil society groups, advocacy organizations have played a very significant role in gradually breaking this notion. Even government-sponsored researches and centers for research on women both within and outside universities have acted as agents of change in this regard. What is also important is to dispel the notion that politics is a dirty game of corruption and muscle power. Therefore, it is not meant for women. These notions could be changed only if the rules of the game of politics could be changed. Here, the Election Commission has a very important role to play in conducting free, fair and violence-free elections, where women can feel comfortable to participate in the political process both as voters and as contestants. Initiatives of Election Commission in 1990s towards this have been found to have resulted in larger turnout of female voters. Political parties also have a very important role to play in cleaning the mess in the political arena through encouraging more women members in the decision-making positions within their parties. Voluntary gender quotas within political parties could actually go a long way in opening gates for a better representation of women in legislative bodies. Besides, parties must also ensure that women's demands must be included in the electoral manifestos. Political parties should also make a deliberate decision not to distribute tickets to candidates who are in any manner involved in gender-based violence or have any history of making sexist comments. Most importantly, the strongest need is to cultivate leadership qualities among women. In addition to education, they also need to be given capacity building training programs irrespective of whichever field they are from. This could facilitate the creation of a large pool of women leaders from various backgrounds. In conclusion, parliamentary and electoral reforms along with attitudinal changes can facilitate more representation of women in legislative bodies. Now let us sum up. In democracies, the role of legislature is critical in establishing an inclusive polity. In this process, it is very important that we have more and more representation of women in the legislative bodies. As we discussed, the problem is not only in India, but across the globe you find very less representation of women in legislative bodies. This is primarily due to the gender stereotypes that societies have against women, as well as the financial and political challenges that they face within societies. In order to change the system, we need to bring about political and electoral changes as well as attitudinal changes within society. Then only we can actually have an inclusive polity like Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Thank you.